While most presidents wore suit jackets, ties, and dress pants all the time, you don't have to any longer. Because Presidents Unplugged has merch. If you want to check out some new shirts to buy as a nice gift for somebody in your family or just something that you want yourself, go to presidentsunpluggedmerch.com to check out new shirts, hoodies, crew necks, and anything else that you can dream of. Now in many more colors and new designs coming soon. I'm very excited for the President's Unplugged merch store to finally be open. Now, let's get back to the show. It was 1876. Just 11 years after the Civil War had ended, America was still a divided nation. Reconstruction had tried its best to stitch the Union back together, but those deep scars from the Civil War remained. The North and South, even though they had shaken hands and ended the war, they didn't trust each other. People were tired. They were tired of corruption. They were tired of conflict. They were tired of politics that felt endless and ugly. For 8 years, Ulysses Grant had been president. He was a war hero from the Civil War. But his administration was not honest. They had been rocked by scandal after scandal. The country wanted a reset. Little did they know that reset would be one of the most contested elections in presidential history. Let's do this. America had no idea who to trust after the Civil War. Lincoln was our president. He led us through the victory, and then he got assassinated. And then Andrew Johnson comes up. Andrew Johnson made some shady decisions which led to his impeachment, the first ever in presidential history. Man, this is not good. Ulysses Grant, even though he was a good speaker and an overall okay leader, he appointed some people to his cabinet that made some questionable decisions. There was not much trust in the government. And after 8 years of Ulysses Grant being our president, they wanted a change. And even though Ulysses Grant technically wanted a third term, yeah, we weren't electing him for one. He didn't need a third term. We wanted something new. So we turned over to Rutherford Hayes, the governor of Ohio. Hayes was a Union veteran, so he fought in the Civil War. And he was known for his calm demeanor and his moral character. He didn't really have crazy enthusiasm for the position. His campaign pitch was simple. He wanted steady leadership and national unity. And steady leadership is a big deal when over the last 8 years, all we've seen is scandal after scandal after scandal. So good on him. The Democrats decided to pick Samuel J. Tilden, the governor of New York, the Battle of the Governors. Tilden was a quiet reformer. He was a pretty successful lawyer who had ran on honesty, efficiency, and integrity. Pretty similar to Rutherford Hayes in a lot of ways. But he promised to clean up Washington, D.C. the same way he'd cleaned up New York. Okay, these look like two good guys with good potential for our country. Until one big point was brought up, way above the others. Reconstruction. Now, even though I did mention this in the Grant episode, Reconstruction and Resolve, I'm going to mention it again. For 8 years under Ulysses S. Grant, the word Reconstruction was everywhere. It was the government's effort to rebuild the South and protect the rights of newly freed Black Americans after the Civil War. Federal troops were stationed in the southern states to keep peace and ensure that these new laws, like the right for African American men to vote, were actually enforced and not just slapped on a sticky note that nobody read, even though sticky notes didn't exist back then. To many in the North, Reconstruction represented hope and justice. These new laws, they're being put into place, and it's all working out so well. But to many in the South, it felt like the federal government was just all over you. There was progress, but there was resentment. It wasn't just political, it was personal. And by 1876, the entire country was fighting about it. The Republicans wanted to continue the ideas of Reconstruction. At least that's what Rutherford Hayes said he would do. And Samuel Tilden, the Democrats, said that it doesn't need to be completely eliminated, but it needs to be slowed down because it's beginning to be overreaching. This was the big issue of 1876 and would make this election have more tension than it ever needed to be because we already know it's going to be close. Or was it close? On election night, November 7th, 1876, the votes were all counted, and it looked like Samuel Tilden from the Democratic Party had done it. He had led a lot of votes in the South, and he even got some key northern states that were kind of conflicting at the time. He had 184 electoral votes, and he had a clear lead of more than 250,000 popular votes nationwide. Rutherford Hayes was way behind. He had 165 votes, while Tilden had 184 electoral votes. But here's the issue. That wasn't all the electoral votes. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. You need a majority of 185 to win. The Republicans were not giving up. It just so happened that 20 votes were up in the air. They were being questioned. In the very key states in this election, in Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon, all their votes combined to a number of 20. If Rutherford Hayes could somehow squeak these extremely close states, and I mean every single one of them, he would come back and beat Samuel Tilden by one vote. But it was going to take a miracle. And that's what makes this election so disputed. People realized that even though it would take a miracle for Rutherford Hayes to win all 20 of those votes, it was still possible. So the Republicans and the Democrats came to an agreement. They sent the whole thing to Congress. It was chaos. I mean, what is Congress going to do? Lawmakers created a special electoral commission. 15 members, some drawn from the House, some drawn from the Senate, and some drawn from the Supreme Court. It was meant to be a very balanced system with 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 1 independent justice who would really cast the deciding vote. For a moment, it really did look fair. 7 and 7, and then there's one disputed guy that might vote either way. It's fair. At least it was fair, until the Republicans pulled off one of their nastiest moves that they could have done. You remember that independent guy that I was talking about? The guy that could sway either way? The one to pretty much decide how the entire group votes? Well, he just happened to be elected to the Senate in Illinois. Even though Illinois screams blue with glory today, Illinois back then was a massive Republican state. They elected this David Davis guy to their Senate. So he had to step out of this commission that they had created of 15 people. So the independent guy's gone. Who in the world are we going to replace him with? We're going to replace him with Joseph Bradley. You want to take a wild guess what Joseph Bradley was? A Republican. Through the oldest trick in the book called the switcheroo, the Republicans had turned what was originally a fair group of voters into a one-sided mess. Over weeks of these people voting, it became very clear. Every disputed electoral vote, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and even that one vote from Oregon, were awarded to Rutherford B. Hayes. Most of these, by the way, were on party lines, meaning that the 15 individuals who were voting, it was 7-8, 7-8, 7-8. Because the independent was gone. The guy that would have gone either way was gone. So it wasn't even really fair anymore. And just like that, all of those 20 electoral votes were given to Hayes. One by one, the votes stacked up until the count stood at 184 for Samuel Tilden and 185 for Rutherford B. Hayes, giving him the majority and the election. When Congress said, "Guess who's your president?" Rutherford Hayes. The people were not happy. At least some of the people. They called Hayes Rutherford B. Hayes. That is so clever, I'm going to have to use that. To them, the presidency had been stolen behind closed doors by partisan judges and backroom deals that gave the Republicans the edge. Behind the scenes, Republicans and Democrats quietly forged what became known as the Compromise of 1877. Which, you want to know what happened in the Compromise of 1877? The Democrats accepted Hayes's victory. In exchange, Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the remaining occupied southern states. So, through a backroom deal, Reconstruction, one of the biggest successes for the Republican Party at the time, Hayes slowly ended, just so the Democrats would shut up about his election results. That's not right. This election was so close in so many different ways. Reconstruction was sort of an experiment, a way for the government to protect these freed slaves, to give them a glimpse of what freedom truly is. Even though the Democrats didn't agree with Reconstruction in a lot of ways, they can't deny it was a great opportunity for freed slaves to see the light of the American dream and the American story. And let me be clear, this didn't end right after Hayes. The second that Reconstruction ended, it wasn't pretty. Segregational movements, voter suppression, meaning that people would literally beat African Americans to prevent them from voting even though they had just gotten that right. And Jim Crow laws that would shape American life for almost a century, saying that you can't do what these people can. The end of Reconstruction is such an evil side of the election of 1876. How through yet again, I've said this twice this month, through a corrupt bargain, millions of Americans, just based off the color of their skin, were put in a place that, sadly, reminded them of where they had just been, in disadvantage. The election of 1876 is remembered today for lots of reasons. The fact that it was probably the most disputed election in American history. The fact that one electoral vote decided it. The fact that the man who won the popular vote lost the presidency. And finally, the fact that the decision that Hayes made to slow down and end Reconstruction would begin an almost century of unfairness and inequality. It's a sad time, it's a real time, and it's one of the most disputed moments in American history. And that is why the election of 1876 is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about the election of 2000, one that actually some of y'all might remember, because I don't even think your grandma was alive during 1876. The election of 2000 was extremely disputed, one where it was so intense that it had to come down to the wire. The wire being 0.009% of Florida's population. Yeah, that's pretty tight. Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.